We previously discussed why witnesses were likely to underreport the number of shots that were fired, and how most witnesses reported only 3 shots, but they didn't report the same 3 shots. When we put their accounts together, we get something like this, giving us roughly 5 different limousine locations at the time a shot was fired. And it just so happens that 5 suspect impulses are what the acoustical experts originally found in the dictabelt recording, although they later whittled that down to 4. So let's examine the acoustical evidence. In 1963, the Dallas Police Department had 2 channels that they used for radio communications. Channel 1 was used for normal, everyday communications. Channel 2 was used for special events, like the presidential motorcade. It so happened that there was a glitch in the system related to the Dallas PD motorcycles. Sometimes the microphone would get stuck in the on position. And on that day in Dallas, there was apparently a motorcycle officer in the motorcade who forgot to switch his radio over to Channel 2, the motorcade channel, and left his radio set to Channel 1. And then his microphone got stuck so that it picked up the sounds around it. And those sounds got recorded onto the Channel 1 recording system, which used a stylus to etch grooves into a strip of plastic called a dictabelt. And eventually, people like Gary Mack, who later became the curator of the 6th Floor Museum in Dealey Plaza, began to wonder if that open microphone might have inadvertently recorded the sounds of gunfire in Dealey Plaza. And so the HSCA hired acoustical experts to analyze the Channel 1 recordings to see if there were, indeed, any gunshot noises present. They used tape recordings that had previously been made from the dictabelt because by then the original dictabelt had become too scratched and otherwise damaged from repeated playbacks for the purposes of making transcripts and so forth to be of much value. And those experts found a number of impulses, that is, patterns of acoustical spikes that fit their criteria for gunshot muzzle blasts and echoes off nearby buildings. The acoustical experts also set up a test. They placed microphones along Houston and Elm Streets. They had a rifle fired from the shooter's window and from a spot along the wooden fence. They recorded those sounds as picked up by the microphones. Then they compared the acoustical spike patterns from those recorded test shots to the spikes on the evidence tape. The principle they used is similar to how modern-day acoustic gunshot detection systems work. And son of a gun, if the spike patterns in the evidence tape didn't match the spike patterns of the test shots. Now, we need to mention a couple of things about these 2 apparent impulses at the beginning and end of the assassination sequence in the dictabelt. These were rejected by the acoustical experts because they didn't meet their criteria. They apparently weren't as loud as rifle test shots fired from the Texas Schoolbook Depository window or the grassy knoll, and didn't have an echo pattern matching test shots from these 2 locations. But those rejections may have been premature. For the early impulse, suppose Taylor or Kivett or Johns had fired a revolver warning shot from Houston Street before the assassin in the window fired as they saw the assassin taking aim. That would account for an impulse not having the volume or echo pattern matching any of the test shots. Or suppose an overzealous Dallas police officer or Secret Service agent, and apparently an overzealous Secret Service agent tackled John Chism, who was trying to run away from Dealey Plaza while carrying his young child, Ricky Chism. Suppose a DPD officer or Secret Service agent had fired at a civilian they thought was suspicious. That could account for an impulse or impulses that didn't match the volume or echo patterns of test shots. We'll mark out the noise impulses that didn't meet the acoustical expert's threshold to recognize them as possible gunshot sounds. We should point out that these two entries are actually the same shot. The evidence impulse was matched to test shots picked up by microphones from two separate arrays, which is why it's listed twice. But it's the same impulse at 139.27 seconds into the stuck mic sequence. Notice that the last two impulses are only a half second apart, a double bang, just like our witnesses described. The first impulse of the double bang was the one that was later determined to be a gunshot from the grassy knoll with 95% confidence. This is our AR-15 shot. Notice that the dictabelt impulses are attributed to either the depository building or the knoll, which were the only test shot locations used during the acoustical reconstruction. Some of the dictabelt impulses have positive correlations with both firing locations, depending on the test target and the microphone positions. This indicates that there's a bit of wiggle room in matching not only the motorcycle positions, but also the precise origin of the dictabelt shots. Enough wiggle room, we believe, for one Secret Service shot fired from the street to mimic the echo pattern of a depository shot 6 floors above it, and another Secret Service shot to mimic the echo pattern of a test shot from the knoll next to the street. The acoustical experts did allow for some side-to-side variance in their knoll test shots, but they did not consider forward and backward variance. We'll transfer the time sequence to our own chart and combine these two entries into the same listing as we think they should have been in the original report. This impulse, attributed to the depository, is our Secret Service warning shot simultaneous to the Altgens photograph. Our Altgens shot was fired from the road in front of the depository, but it was close enough to the test fire location to mimic the echo pattern of a shot from the window up above the road. Interestingly, the best correlation of echo patterns between a test shot and this dictabelt impulse was with the rifle withdrawn 2 feet back inside the window, suggesting that the actual shot wasn't as loud as a test shot with the muzzle outside the window. But witnesses reported seeing the muzzle sticking out of the window and then being withdrawn after the last shot was fired. Since we believe this shot to have been fired by a handgun, that withdrawn muzzle match fits our scenario very well. And just as we think the origin for the shot simultaneous with the Altgens photograph was close enough to the depository window to mimic the echo pattern of test shots fired from there, likewise, Hickey's position in the road in front of the grassy knoll was close enough to the test shot location to mimic a shot from there. The original degree of confidence for this shot as a knoll shot was only about 50% by Dr. Barger's group. The 95% confidence came later, after the Weiss and Assassination group made a more specific study of this shot based on amplitude. The 15-foot side-to-side variance they allowed for was enough, we believe, to account for our shooter on the road in front of the fence instead of along the fence. The other 3 shots, of course, we attribute to the Texas School Book Depository, as the acoustical experts did. Acoustical expert Leo Chaloukian was apparently contacted by someone in the FBI to analyze the tape of the dictabelt. In this clip, he mentions only 4 gunshot noises, but bear in mind that we attribute one of the HSCA impulses to a handgun rather than a rifle shot, so it probably would not have been as loud as the others.
I got a call. He said, I want you to listen to these tapes. I want your opinion. He was in Washington. I said, sure, bring it by. I said, you're going to bring the original or you're going to give me a copy? He said, what do you want? Well, I'd rather have the original, but if you feel uncomfortable about that, I'll listen to the copy. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll bring both of them. So he did. Brought and I don't know how he got even let him have the original, but it's the FBI.
Now, what tape is this? Where's this from?
This is from the recording on the motorcycle of the policeman. You got it? It's that recording. The motorcycle cop had a recorder that was going, don't ask me how it was set up. I don't know how it was set up on the motorcycle, but it's that recording that I listened to. I must have spent hours on that thing with him, with certain equipment and controls and frequencies and filters and what have you. They wanted to know, in my opinion, how many shots were shot, because everybody said it was 2. And that's all I knew. You must understand, all I knew there was nothing about other than 2 shots. There was a question about it. I remember reading about that, but nothing else. So when he brought that over, I put it through my process, the equipment and so on. He sat there with me. And at this point, I was using the copy. I didn't want to touch the original at that point. And I finally, after an hour or 2 hours or whatever the hell it was, I said, I think there's 4 shots here. He says, are you sure? And I said, I'll point them out to you. And I had the scope in front of me, and I could show him the peaks. And here's one here, 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 and here. And I would equalize it and compress it and suppress the background and everything, and I could bring that frequency up and spot it. I said, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I said, can I put the original on, just to make sure? And I ran it down to that point. I got the same thing. So it was an exact copy of the original. So I gave him back the original. I didn't want to touch it any longer. And he said, okay. And I didn't hear anything after that. But then at one point, on KCET, they had a mock trial of Oswald. I don't know if you remember that or not. And they had people come by to testify that were originally involved at that period of time. Some of them, of course, had died. Some of them were still alive. And whoever was around, they brought to testify and as a mock trial. And the guy that I dealt with was a witness. And he got up there and said, I went through this with a professional, and he feels, as well as I, that there's 4 shots, not 2. Now, my friend over there, John, tells me there's just recently, there's comments being made that there was 4 shots. Well, I knew there was 4 shots back in the 70s.
Now, back then, though, tell us what the significance is that you went through the tape and heard 4 rather than 2 shots.
The significance of this is it's humanly impossible for one man to get that many shots out in a period of time that it exists, that it took place in, which means it had to be 2 people. There had to be. There's no way. They even did a test with the rifle. They were able to get 2 shots out in the period of so many seconds, which makes sense. 4 shots, impossible. For the period of time that it took place in. Impossible. Which means there had to be a second gunman. And that's when the grassy knoll comes in.
Here's the dictabelt audio as published by the Gallery magazine paper record. You'll be disappointed when you hear it because you can't really hear anything with the naked ear that sounds like shots until the sounds of rifle shots are added back in. That's because an automatic gain control, or AGC, suppression was applied to the recording, supposedly as part of the Dallas police recording process. The record is narrated by Gary Mack, who was the guy who raised the issue that the stuck microphone might have recorded the gunshot sounds in the first place, and who later became curator of the 6th Floor Museum.
The Dallas police radio tape was never examined for gunshots until December 1976. Under the direction of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, an acoustical analysis has proven at least 4 shots were fired at President Kennedy from 2 different locations. The findings are primarily responsible for the committee's conclusion that there was indeed a conspiracy, as critics have insisted for 15 years. Segment 1 is the Dallas Police radio tape exactly as recorded November 22, 1963. The assassination occurred at 17 seconds past 12:30 p.m. The first shot was fired 3 seconds after an officer says, "All right, Jackson." Segment 2 is the Dallas Police radio tape on which 4 rifle shots in the correct time sequence have been superimposed. The shots were recorded in Dealey Plaza during the House Committee's test firings in 1978. About 25 seconds after the last shot, the motorcycle with the open microphone greatly accelerates on the way to Parkland Hospital.
Mack himself asserted that there was no automatic gain control, or AGC, in the Dallas police recording system. In this article, Mack is refuting the refutation of the acoustical evidence based on the supposed presence of AGC in the original recording, which was a side benefit of running the dictabelt recording through the AGC, in addition to suppressing the sounds of gunshots as recognizable gunfire, which was the primary purpose of the AGC. However, despite the AGC, the acoustical experts were still able to find the impulses that contained the echo patterns of gunfire that matched the echo patterns of Dealey Plaza test shots. And note that the experts worked with recordings of the dictabelt that they were given, not the dictabelt itself. There's a lot to like about the acoustical evidence, including the 95% or better confidence assigned to the grassy knoll shot, the number of impulses suspected to be gunshot noises, the double bang, and the order in the data. What order in the data means is that the echo patterns in the dictabelt matched the echo patterns of the test shots and the microphone placements in a sequential manner. They didn't skip around, as one might expect if the apparent gunshot impulses were just random noises. They occurred in a progressive manner. The fact that the 5 impulses in the dictabelt matched microphone placements that were sequential means that it's not likely that the recorded impulses were anything other than the gunshot sounds they were purported to be. There's also a lot that's odd about the HSCA acoustical study. For one thing, the acoustical experts and HSCA decided that the grassy knoll shot missed. Additionally, the HSCA also decided that this impulse was a false positive because Oswald would not have had enough time to recycle his weapon, so they rejected it, which is really strange because if you're going to reject an impulse based on the 2.5 seconds it takes to recycle a Mannlicher Carcano carbine, the impulse to reject would be the one immediately before that one. But that's not what they decided. They also decided that this impulse was the headshot seen in the Zapruder film at frame 313, and that the very first shot was the single bullet theory shot, presumably leaving the last depository shot as the tag shot, which is about the only thing we agree with. Let's discuss that rejected impulse. As researcher Donald Thomas, PhD, notes, the rejection of this impulse was for ad hoc reasons, and ad hoc is Latin for bullshit. Besides which, the rejection of this impulse for that reason, that Oswald didn't have enough time to recycle his Mannlicher Carcano carbine, makes 0 sense because it still left only 1.6 seconds between the first impulse and the second impulse. Still not enough time for the Oswald weapon to be recycled. For the reason that they rejected the third impulse, it would have made more sense to reject the previous impulse, the second impulse, which would have allowed 2.6 seconds to recycle the Mannlicher Carcano weapon, which, while still fast, is at least possible. But of course, that's not what they did. And then there's their attribution of this shot as the kill shot, lining it up with the Mormon photograph and the Zapruder film frame number 313. This would make their only headshot the second shot in their sequence, thereby aligning Connolly's wounds with a single bullet theory first shot, which of course doesn't line up with the Connolly's insistence that the governor was hit with the second shot, not the first. But there's another apparent problem with the dictabelt. Remember, the Dallas police had 2 radio communications channels. Channel 1 was used for normal communications. Channel 2 was used for the motorcade communications. The bike with the mic was tuned to Channel 1, which doesn't mean anything in and of itself. But on Channel 2, about a minute after the shooting, Sheriff Decker told his men to, quote, hold everything secure until he got there. In the Gallery magazine record, there was apparently an extremely faint hold everything secure utterance discovered by musician Steve Barber, who apparently had the audio equipment to be able to hear it. It was later decided that the utterance was a crosstalk, that is, a transmission from Channel 2 that was heard by the stuck mic or another open Channel 1 mic that happened to be near a Channel 2 radio that was broadcasting the transmission. Crosstalks and deliberate transmissions simultaneously broadcast over both channels help acoustical researchers to synchronize the 2 channels. And that hold everything secure utterance, if a genuine crosstalk, would mean that the supposed gunshot impulses appeared on the dictabelt about a minute after the actual shooting. But that supposed crosstalk, hold everything secure, inaudible to those of us without Barber's special equipment, might not have been a crosstalk at all. It can be explained by the peculiar interaction of the playback stylus and the grooves of the dictabelt rather than as a crosstalk, as Donald Thomas notes. And we note these remarks by Chris Scally, whose excellent work outlines the complex and dubious chain of custody of the original dictabelt and original recordings. No, the real problem with the acoustical evidence is not the mostly inaudible hold everything secure utterance. The real problem with the acoustical evidence is finding a motorcycle officer who fits the predicted positions. That is, who was within 18 feet or so of the microphone positions that matched the echo patterns in the dictabelt. These microphone positions, and one of them especially, this one. According to the echo pattern match, the motorcycle with the open mic had to be within 18 feet of microphone 4 in Array 2. The HSCA looked for a motorcycle officer who might be in that position and decided that H.B. McLean fit the bill.
I don't care what they say, it wasn't mine.
Chief Counsel for the HSCA, G. Robert Blakey, had this to say.
If you could prove to me that there was no police officer in the place where he had to be, you would falsify my theory.
Well, it wasn't exactly Blakey's theory, but whatever. Computer animator Dale Myers took Blakey's bait and did just that, showed that it was very unlikely for a motorcycle officer to be in that location, and he won an Emmy Award for his work. Now, we're the first to admit that Myers' 3D computer animation of Dealey Plaza is extremely cool, and he should win an award just for that. But the assumption that he disproved the acoustical evidence is wrong. We find it funny that using the exact same films and images that the HSCA used to prove that the bike with the mic was H.B. McLean's, Myers used to prove that it was not H.B. McLean's. So what's wrong with Myers' work? First, it assumes authenticity of the Zapruder film and the other films. But we agree there was no motorcycle officer in this location, and we really don't need 3D animation to show us that McLean wasn't in this location. He said he wasn't in sworn testimony. He said that he only heard one shot and that he was on Houston Street halfway between Main and Elm when he heard it, and he took off from there to the hospital. We take Blakey's challenge to prove that there was no motorcycle in the predicted location as a wink and a nod invitation for researchers like Myers to do just that, because we think Blakey knew there wouldn't be any motorcycle at that location. So what's going on? The key to all of this is the accuracy of this diagram, purportedly showing the microphone placements used in the acoustical reconstruction tests. But we don't think this diagram is accurate. Not accurate at all. The diagram was created by Dr. James Barger based on a written description of street features, which someone else wrote up and provided to him. The diagram wasn't created as a plan for where to place the microphones. It was created by Dr. Barger as an after-the-fact description. Barger was not actually present for the acoustical tests in Dealey Plaza when the microphones were set up. He had no first-hand knowledge of the microphone placement. The description of street features that was given to Barger is not something that anyone else has access to if they want to double-check the accuracy of Barger's diagram. Maybe the description of street features is buried in the archives somewhere? Maybe not. It hasn't yet been produced, and no one seems to know where it is. And we have no way of knowing how closely the description of microphone placement conforms to the actual placement. Photographs might confirm the mic placement. However, there are only 3 photographs of the acoustical reconstruction available to the public, and these don't confirm the mic placement. We'll show them to you one at a time, bigger, so that you can see for yourself that they don't do anything to verify the microphone placement. Here's the first, which doesn't really show us any microphones. Here's the second, showing 4 or possibly 5 microphones that appear to be in a string stretching down Elm Street, starting at about the pillar. But they don't all appear to be set up yet. And here's the third. We can count about half a dozen microphones, not all of which appear to be set up yet. So this is another incomplete setup. The only available photographs don't really help us in evaluating the diagram's accuracy. There are certainly some things to question about the diagram beyond our own skepticism. For example, why does the first array start around the bend on Main Street, but more to the point, why doesn't the last array continue further down Elm Street toward the triple underpass? After all, no one theoretically knew which motorcycle had the open mic. It could have been a lead motorcycle, which would have placed it ahead of the president's limousine during the shooting, even if they thought that the Mormon photo and Z313 frame were the correct location for the explosive headshot. Why are there two number 10s in the second array? Presumably, one of them is the missing number 10 from the third array. Why are microphones placed side by side in the second array before Houston Street even starts to widen for the intersection? Note the position of the dots in the second array around the turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the two number 10s, 11, 12. Why do the numbers jump around in such a confusing manner, when part of the analytical purpose was to see if there was a sequential order to the data? You see why there are reasons to question this diagram. We decided to try our own hand at creating a mic placement plan. We used Barger's apparent logic for our spacing, half of the width of Dealey Plaza streets, or actually we used half of Houston Street's width throughout. Elm Street appears to be a bit more narrow. The straightaway on Houston is easy, but for the turn and the S shape of Elm Street, we used scaled circles representing the width of Houston Street with crosshairs to show the center points for our radius. We managed pretty well. We managed to get good coverage of the entire motorcade route in Dealey Plaza, including the turn, in a progressive order, whether one takes a sharp inside turn or a wide outside turn. Our diagram makes more sense than Barger's, and we can create a pretty good description of street features for someone else to follow if our diagram for mic placement isn't clear enough. Now, admittedly, we tweaked our diagram to reflect a motorcycle placement we like. We worked backwards, so to speak, in order to get something like the positions we want, which is a motorcycle position somewhere around the turn for the first shot, somewhere in front of the schoolbook depository for the second, not quite up to Marianne Mormon's position for the third, and well past the Mormon photograph position for the last two shots, not far from the bottom of the stairs. But our diagram certainly makes more sense than Barger's, which has no supporting evidence to verify its accuracy. None. Zero. Zip. Zilch. Nada. And our diagram doesn't jump all over the place in the second array, and we don't skip any numbers in the third. Our spacing is consistent between mics, and our placement stretches all the way to the triple underpass. And since, again, theoretically, no one knew whether the bike with the mic might be one of the lead motorcycles, something like our diagram would better serve the purposes of the acoustical tests than Barger's. Why do we like those positions better than the ones in Barger's diagram? We have an alternative candidate to H.B. McLean as the officer who had the bike with the mic. Our candidate is one of the limousine escort officers, and he can be seen in the Altgen 6 photograph. Sort of. Which one is it? James Chaney, Bobby Hargis, or B.J. Martin? No, he's the fourth officer, Douglas Jackson. He rode to the outside of Chaney, but somewhat further back. He should be in the photograph. In fact, he is in the photograph. Or rather, his helmet is. Remember this?
The first shot was fired 3 seconds after an officer says, "All right, Jackson."
We think that's probably James Chaney talking to Douglas Jackson and being picked up by the open mic. And you'd be hard-pressed to find it in any of the transcripts. It's either left out entirely or changed to, I'll check it. But it sure sounds like, "All right, Jackson," to us. So we can now place Jackson at the time of the Altgen 6 photograph, closer to the corner, right in the neighborhood of Array 2. This position doesn't exactly match our Mic 6 placement, but then again, since the source of the shot isn't from the TSBD window, but the road in front of the window, we have a bit of leeway in the microphone placement. It may be possible to confirm our scenario using current technology to combine computer modeling of Dealey Plaza and the surrounding buildings and signs and so on, as they were in 1963, with theoretical shots made from different locations, add variable motorcycle placements, and analyze the computer-generated echo patterns in comparison with the dictabelt evidence to find exact matches. But that type of analysis is beyond both our budget and our expertise. There are reasons beyond just guessing for why we like Jackson as having the bike with the mic. For one, whoever the officer was, he was in a position for his mic to pick up the acoustic shockwave or N-wave precedence for the last two shots. And that officer's perception of the acoustic shockwave led him to a very specific action that, while incredibly brave, was also misguided. So, what's an acoustic shockwave or N-wave precedence? When a bullet is fired, the sound of the shot, the muzzle blast, moves away from the gun in more or less a circle, traveling outward at the speed of sound like a single ripple in a pond. But if the bullet travels faster than the speed of sound, a different type of phenomenon occurs, a pressure wave called an acoustic shock wave. The supersonic bullet creates heavy pressure in front of it and negative pressure behind it as it travels, and this generates a sound similar to the crack of a whip, a sonic boom, as it were. In order to receive the acoustic shock wave, the ear witness, or the microphone, has to be positioned somewhat between the gun and its target, but off to the side of the bullet's path, of course. The shooter is here, and the bullet travels in this direction faster than the speed of sound. The pressure wave, or shock wave precedence, is generated at the speed of the bullet. Meanwhile, the sound of the shot itself, the muzzle blast, spreads out at the slower speed of sound. On an oscillograph, this shockwave precedence looks a lot like a capital letter N, hence its other name, N-wave. And since the bullet travels faster than the muzzle blast, the crack of this N-wave arrives at the ear witness, or open microphone, before the muzzle blast, preceding the muzzle blast, because the sound of the muzzle blast is limited to the speed of sound. Was Jackson in a position to receive the acoustic shock wave for the last two shots? We believe he was. And why was there no shock wave for the previous shots? Let's start with the middle impulse, the one we believe was simultaneous with the Mormon photo. Since this impulse was rejected for the ad hoc bullshit reason of Oswald not having enough time to recycle his weapon, it wasn't really discussed. We don't know if there was an N wave for this shot. There could have been, or there might not have been. If anyone even looked for it, it was not reported. So let's move on to the Altgen 6 shot. Since we believe this shot to have been fired by a handgun, the bullet probably was not supersonic. Therefore, the sound would not have had an N wave. And as for the first shot, as the outboard escort officer, Jackson had a tendency to hang back. Here he is next to the follow-up car, but not the limousine, in an earlier motorcade picture. And in fact, we see by his helmet that he's hanging back in the Altgen 6 photograph. Remember that the shockwave precedence is a V-shaped wave. Someone who is too far off to the side of the bullet's path when the bullet finds its mark might not receive it because once the bullet hits its target, it's no longer supersonic. We don't know what Jackson's exact position was at the time of the forehead shot, but there's a good chance he was hanging back, possibly even still in the turn when the bullet found its mark. He was too far to the side, or even beyond the target, for the shockwave precedents to reach him. He simply wasn't in a position to receive it. So let's now take a look at the last two shots, which were only a half-second apart, so he would have been in a similar position for both. Again, Jackson would have to have been somewhat between the gun and the president in order to pick up the shockwave precedents. And we see by the next film that he had indeed caught up to his usual position since the Alton's photograph was taken. He's between the follow-up car and the limousine, so he would indeed have been in a position to pick up both the shockwave from the AR-15 shot and the TAG shot. There's one other aspect of Jackson as having the bike with the mic that we'd like to explore: the motorcycle officer who has been dubbed the Knoll Rider.
And a policeman throwed his motorcycle down in the middle of the street and run up the embankment with his pistol drawn. He was running toward that particular spot. And also another motorcycle policeman right behind him tried to ride up the embankment on his motorcycle, and it turned over about halfway up the embankment. And he got out, got off his motorcycle and left it laying there and run on over to the fence with his gun in his hand. The first one up here on the scene, other than those who, of course, who were standing around, including two on top of the triple underpass, was one who rode a motorcycle up the incline coming up from the lower portion of Elm Street. And he rode perhaps two-thirds of the way up or more before he deserted his motorcycle.
And of the police, there were several motorcycles around him, and they stopped, or one or two must have went with him, and one ran up the hill, and the friend that was with him ran up the hill across the street from where the shots came from.
I ran out into Dealey Plaza. The traffic was congealed. It was all the horns were beeping. Police motorcycles were riding up over through flower beds and up steps. People were screaming, horns beep. It was unbelievable chaos.
So then, as I surveyed the scene, just for a moment there, I could see the confusion, the bedlam, people covering up their kids. Motorcycle cop rode his motorcycle up the grassy knoll and just let it keep running. He jumped off, the motorcycle went on till it fell over. And then he went into the book depository with another policeman.
Actually, we don't think that the Knoll Rider ran into the depository, but that Bob Jackson merged his memory of two motorcycle officers who went up the knoll, one on his bike and one on foot, with another motorcycle officer, Marion Baker, who parked his bike on the access street in front of the depository and then ran inside the building, alone. Although we're not the first researchers to believe that Douglas Jackson was the Knoll Rider, we believe we're the first to associate his actions with the acoustic evidence. This drawing was in Dr. Barger's acoustical report, and it represents exactly what we believe was the case with Douglas Jackson. Our ear witness, or observer in this case, is Douglas Jackson. Here's our shooter, either Hickey or Oswald, because the same principle applies to both shots of the double bang when the open mic picked up the acoustic shock waves. The bullet travels this way towards the president, supersonic, thus creating the shock wave. The muzzle blast spreads out slower at the speed of sound and ripples away from the gun in a circular motion at 1100 feet per second. But it's more complex than that. An ear witness will typically misperceive the source of a shot as perpendicular to the acoustic shock wave. In Barger's drawing, the observer, Douglas Jackson, perceives the source of the shot as perpendicular away from the shock wave, that is, to his right. Traveling slower is the muzzle blast. Our observer perceives this also as coming from his right. in a direction exactly opposite to the point of origin, that is, outward along the expanding radius in a front-back reversal of the direction of the shooter. But the ear witnesses don't always perceive the origin as perpendicular away from the shock wave. In fact, ear witnesses are more likely to perceive the origin as perpendicular towards the shock wave, and we believe that also happened. Dr. Weiss included in his HSCA report this diagram to show an ear witness indicating a perception of origin perpendicular away from the shock wave, or ballistic crack, as Barger did, but also another ear witness who perceives the origin as perpendicular towards the shock wave. Remember S.M. Holland describing 2 motorcycle officers who went up the knoll? Jackson's fellow horseman, Bobby Hargis, also ran towards the knoll area, albeit on foot, after leaving his motorcycle in the street. And seeing 2 cops chasing after a phantom assassin, seeing a puff of smoke above the road in front of the fence, others, like S.M. Holland, just naturally assumed that the knoll was where at least one shot came from. But what the motorcycle officers, the cops, the reporters like Robert McNeil, who ran to the fence, found on the other side of the fence was nothing.
And I noticed there were policemen and plainclothesmen with guns up running up the hill, so I ran with them. We got to the top of the hill, against the fence by the overpass, and everybody paused there for a moment and looked around, and then the cops went over the fence, so I went with them. And there was nothing there, no signs of anything.
There was nothing up there except the confusion caused by the belief that there was. We do think it was very brave of both Jackson and Hargis to head towards where they perceived the danger, as brave as Clint Hill's running to the back of the limousine, although Jackson and Hargis never received any commendations for chasing their phantom menace. And seeing cops and McNeil and a handful of others who perceived a shot as having come from that direction rushing up the knoll, curious bystanders followed their lead in hopes of seeing the arrest of the assassin. They were disappointed. We also note the sounds other than the gunshot impulses that were found on the dictabelt. Some of these are the same sounds that critics have tried to use to disprove the dictabelt evidence. For example, the Carillon bell. But there was an explanation for that. Then there were the sirens that seemed to pass the bike with the mic as it was stationary. The sirens were also noted in the Sonalyst half-century report commissioned by Larry Sabato. If the bike with the mic were left idling on the knoll where it had fallen while its rider ran the rest of the way up the hill, and motorcycles further back in the motorcade turned on their sirens, it would explain the passing sirens. One of those sirens likely belonged to H.B. McLean, the motorcycle officer that the HSCA had decided had the bike with the mic. Then there were the motorcycle engine noises. First, there was a very evident slowdown right before the first shot was recorded. Well, Barger himself explains that. The motorcycle was slowing down in order to negotiate the turn onto Elm Street. The Sonalyst report, commissioned by Larry Sabato, is somewhat difficult to align with the Barger HSCA report because they synchronized their data differently. Barger used the number of seconds within the stuck mic sequence, whereas the Sonalyst report aligns with the timeline that they developed. It would have been helpful if Sonalyst had used the same method Barger used to make it more apparent where their descriptions fall relative to the suspect impulses. But that's not what they did. At any rate, their conclusion that the engine noises of the bike with the mic did not match what they expected a motorcycle in the motorcade to do did not take into account the possibility that the bike with the mic was also the Knoll Rider. In that case, the speed up of the engine immediately after the last gunshot would equate with Jackson trying to drive his bike up the hill. The idling noise would equate to his abandoning the bike when it couldn't reach all the way to the top and continued his way on foot. Meanwhile, other motorcycles would pass his position with their sirens on. The engine noise would continue to be slow or idle until Jackson returned to his bike and rode it back down the hill. When he reached the road again, then he would have sped up to make his way to Parkland Hospital. Jackson would have slowed down in the turn before the first schoolbook depository shot. He may have sped up and then slowed down again when he heard the Option 6 warning shot. Same for the Mormon shot. But he would have had to speed up to catch up to his assigned position as seen in the Nix film, and in order to receive the acoustic shockwave from the AR-15 shot and the final TSBD shot. Then up the knoll, the idling, the passing sirens, etc. All that explains the variance in speed of the motorcycle engines, the acceleration and deceleration and idling heard in the dictabelt. There was a P whistle heard. We think this may have been used by Emery Roberts in the follow-up car to recall Jack Reddy, who had started to run toward the president's car after Clint Hill did. And then we get to the bonk, or later bonk bonk. According to the Sonalyst consultants, at least one of the bonks sounded like the closing of car doors. We have two possible explanations for the bonks. One is that one or more of the bonks is the sound of the motorcycle as it jumped the curb going up the hill and or drove off the curb as it came down. The other explanation, of course, is the one that Sonalyst gives, the sound of car doors slamming closed. Jack Reddy described jumping off the running board to follow Clint Hill, then being recalled and squeezing into the front seat next to Emery Roberts. Of course, there's this McIntyre photo showing him still on the running board on the other side of the triple underpass. But have we mentioned the possibility of photographic forgery? Because we also have the Vulcaned AP photo of the limousine on Stemmons Freeway, which seems to show 3 agents in the front seat and no running board agents. So at what point did Reddy get into the car? We think it was in Dealey Plaza. At any rate, Jack Reddy wasn't the only possibility for the bonk of a door closing. We have Warren Taylor's open door, plus the open doors on the other side of the VP follow-up car. Plus, there's the station wagon in the Willis photo, although we can't really tell whether this guy is coming or going, or even which way he's facing. We don't really see the Knoll Rider's bike in this picture, but we don't rule out its being composited out of the picture either. And those are just the car doors we can demonstrate. So really, all that is needed to accept the acoustical evidence is the recognition that this is a deliberate misrepresentation. Given all the other cover-up involved in the Kennedy assassination, we don't think that's too much of a stretch. We think it unlikely that noises with echo patterns that match the echo patterns of the test shots from the Texas Schoolbook Depository that occur in a progressive order, that include a double bang that witnesses describe, that include extraneous noises that can be explained with the officer who had the bike with the mic and the Knoll Rider being one and the same. We don't think all that would be the result of an unrelated motorcycle recording random noises that just happened to match all that. Given that so much of the JFK assassination evidence has been fabricated or destroyed, we don't think that this diagram with no supporting evidence is any more reliable. We'll discuss more about how the cover-up has hurt our country next in the final episode of our series, Part 10, The Conspiracies.